Hello, my name is Julianne Hatala, and welcome to my Know Your TIEP video presentation. I will be focusing on the employment domain for this presentation. The setting will be pre-K to 8 pull-out support. There are two PA standard categories that align with this presentation. The first is career education and work. The standard under this category is identify and apply time management strategies as they relate to both personal and work situations. The second PA standard category is family and consumer science. The domain that aligns with this category is deduce the importance of time management skills, for example, at home, at school, or during recreational activities. The student challenge that I'm focusing on during this presentation is challenge number 10. This reads, the student's parents have recently divorced. On weekends, the student stays with mom. With this new arrangement, the student will be responsible for laundry and basic house chores, such as emptying the dishwasher, taking out the trash, keeping the room clean, and homework. The student has had a history of struggling with executive function skills in the past. So the student need that I have developed based on the student challenge is the student needs to remember the tasks he is responsible for completing. The targeted specific skill for this presentation, based on the student challenge and the specific student need, is that the student will need to make a to-do list for the weekend at the end of each school week. And I chose this skill because this is a skill that the student will be able to use in other contexts other than school. So making a to-do list is something that the student will be able to do at home, or maybe in the future when they're making a list of things they need to do to get a job, or even in school too. So the observable and measurable goal that is based on this student's skill is given access to a piece of paper, Brennan will write down the tasks he needs to complete over the weekend at the end of each week and will earn an average of at least a 5 out of 5 on the to-do list checklist, see Appendix A, given no more than 10 minutes. This is a copy of the IEP transition grid. The arrow shows where I will be putting the specific service or activity because I am focusing specifically on the employment domain. So now you can see the transition grid showing only the part pertaining to employment. And here you see the wording for the IEP service or activity. And this reads, Brennan will have an opportunity and he will be verbally reminded by his teachers to write a to-do list and complete the to-do list recording checklist, see Appendix A, to ensure he is writing a comprehensive to-do list for the weekend. And this is going to happen in the classroom Brennan has homeroom in at the end of each week. And the people who are responsible for this task are the homeroom teacher, the special education teacher, and also the student himself, Brennan McDonald. You can also see the employment goal that says Brennan has a goal to get a job at the grocery store near his house beginning in the 12th grade. And the courses of study that Brennan is taking this year, which are math, reading, social studies, science, history, and Italian. Now we're going to start to look at the assessment tool that would be used to assess this service or activity. You can see that this assessment tool is titled Appendix A, which is consistent with the vocabulary used in the IEP transition grid as well. You have a copy of this whole assessment on the D2L discussion board, but we will look through it piece by piece during this presentation. If you look at the bullets, the bulleted letters, you can see many of the things we have talked about already that are in the IEP, but listing these things here really helps anyone who may be giving this assessment because the person giving this assessment may not have been involved in the development of the IEP and they may not have been involved in the development of this assessment. So look through these things that they would be able to see before giving this assessment if they did not have background knowledge on it. First, you see the student name, and then you see the name of the team member tracking their performance. Then you have, does the student have an IEP functional or academic goal that directly connects to this service or activity? Next is the student need this service or activity connects with. So this is the student needs to remember the task he needs to complete. And then you have the skill focus, which is the student will make a to-do list for the weekend at the end of each school week. Next is the IEP transition domain connection. So it would be really easy for anyone to see that this assessment connects to the employment domain. Again listed is the wording of the transition grid service or activity in the current IEP, which is Brennan will have an opportunity and be verbally reminded by his teachers to write a to-do list and complete the homework recording checklist, see Appendix A, to ensure he is writing a comprehensive to-do list for the weekend. And lastly, you can see the observable or measurable goal aligned with this assessment tool, which is given access to a piece of paper, Brennan will write down the tasks he needs to complete over the weekend at the end of each week and earned an average of at least 5 out of 5 on the to-do list checklist, see Appendix A, given no more than 10 minutes. So anyone who would be administering this assessment tool, even if they had no prior background knowledge on the assessment, would be able to see really clearly here what need this assessment came from, what specific skill it's focusing on, and what it aims to do, or what the goal of this assignment is. So the activity for this presentation is that the student will write a to-do list and then also fill out the to-do list checklist. And this is that checklist. So here you can see that this goal is recorded each week because the student writes the to-do list at the end of each week, and then it's averaged monthly. So remember that for this IEP goal, we want to see that the student has an average of 5 out of 5 by the end of the school year. And here you can also see the different components that the student is required to list or at least consider when writing their to-do list. So these come directly from the challenge that the student is facing. And you can see that the first column is where the student would write the date, and then the second column is the beginning of the components that are needed in the checklist. So the first is that the student will list all the homework that needs to be done over the weekend, but it's important that we're also addressing tasks that are not school related because that was one of the things from the challenge that the student was forgetting to do chores and things around the house. So next, I've just listed the different categories that the chores could be so that the student will be able to go through and really consider all of them. So you see that the student is asked to list all house chores to be done in the kitchen, all house chores to be done in the bedroom, all house chores to be done in other areas of the home, and also to check with this checklist with a teacher, and then the teacher just has to initial it. And the student also gets a point if the student does get it initialed by a teacher. So then in the last column, you would just total up the points the student got for that week. And then in the bottom cell, you can see that that's where the monthly average out of 5 points would go. So, this is another part of the assessment tool, and it's the scoring procedures and rules. And this is just another thing that keeps this assessment valid so that if anyone that was not involved in the creation of the IEP or of the assessment would know exactly how to score this assessment tool, and that way the data would be consistent. So, the scoring procedures and rules you can see um, follow very closely the vocabulary from the checklist. So, for example, in column 1, the student will write the date of the day they are writing the to-do list for. And then in column 2, student earns 1 point for listing all the homework that must be done over the weekend. In column 3, the student earns 1 point for listing all the house chores to be done in the kitchen. In column 4, the student earns 1 point for listing all the house chores to be done in the bedroom. And in column 5, the student earns 1 point for listing all the house chores to be done in other areas of the home. And finally, in column 6, the student earns 1 point for getting the teacher to initial. So, having this written out for anyone who might be administering the assessment really just helps the results stay true to the student's performance. This is the last part of the assessment tool, and this part of the assessment tool really helps the team keep detailed track of the student's progress with this task. It also helps the team know if the goal needs revision. So, the person administering the assessment tool can write down observations. And if, say, one of those observations is that the student is doing this task really quickly and needs no more assistance and have mastered the skill, the team might want to revise this goal. And you can see underneath notable observations as well, there's a section for team recommendations. So it's easy to see that the team either wants to continue to administer this assessment however often they choose, to reteach the skill, to review the skill, or whatever else the team might feel is necessary. And this part of the assessment tool really just helps give a really detailed assessment of how the student is performing during this task. Now that we've seen how the data will be collected for this assessment, let's talk about what kind of data will be collected. So there's definitely qualitative data that will be collected from this assessment tool. And the qualitative data is the tracking the student's ability to record all the homework to be done on a 1 to 5 point scale. And you can also see that the tracking of the student's ability to list the various types of chores. So there are house chores to be done in the kitchen, house chores to be done in the bedroom, and other areas of the home. All of these abilities will be rated on a 1 to 5 point scale. And then finally, the ability of the student to get a teacher to initial the to-do list will also be measured on a 1 to 5 point scale.
It's not recording what we're saying right now.
So this assessment tool also collects quantitative data. And the quantitative data collected by this assessment tool is the connection to the IEP transition domain, the teacher made notable observations,
Yeah, I have to make it
and
to YouTube.
the trends that can be tracked in the student behaviors or observations, as well as notable recommendations based on the student's performance.
It's this. It's the same thing.
Here we can see the connection to present level data. So this shows how the table would be included in the present levels portion of the IEP and what the data would look like. And this table shows data if I had only recorded data for January and February, and this would be the quantitative data for those 2 months. This shows
Why did I
more of the
talk so
connection to the
much?
present level data, and it actually shows how progress of the actual service or activity would be recorded. So you can see that the exact wording of the service or activity is listed again, and that is Brennan will have an opportunity and he will be verbally reminded by his teachers to write a to-do list and complete the to-do list recording checklist, which is in Appendix A, to ensure he is writing a comprehensive to-do list for the weekend. As far as the resources and the cost for this service or activity, the only resources that are really needed are the to-do list checklist, an adult to sign off on the checklist weekly, and at least 10 minutes on the last school day of the week for the student to complete their to-do list checklist and revise their to-do list if necessary. And there's really no cost other than the 10 minutes needed to complete. Now we can see the big picture connections. So when looking at the question, how is acquiring this skill going to increase post-school success for students in the pre-K to 8 with disabilities? There are a few things to consider. So this skill can be used across many contexts. So it's not a skill that can be taught and only used within the context of school. This activity gives the student the opportunity to see that list making can be used in areas that are not related to school because he is asked to write down the things he needs to do at home that are not just homework. This will serve him in the future because it helps him see that large tasks can be broken up into a list of smaller, more manageable tasks. And it also helps him see that things are easier to remember when you write them down. So he doesn't have to worry about that issue of forgetting what he needs to get done. If everything is written down, he can just look back at his list. It also holds the student accountable for what he needs to get done. So he has the choice of thinking about the different chores he might have to do around the house and writing those down as he sees fit. Some published evidence that reinforces the necessity for students to learn this skill can be seen in Chapter 2 of our textbook. The quote from the textbook that I chose is, "The last step in helping to ensure student self-determination is discovering the individual goals the student has for their lives and also seeing the need to enhance their own self-determination skills that are not covered in the UDT lessons and instruction developed for the whole class." So this task addresses something that would not be covered in whole class instruction because the rest of the class probably is not having this specific challenge that this student is facing. And it also tackles a skill that is relevant directly to the student's life. So the student won't have to search and find what the connection between learning this skill and how it might apply to his own life, because it's pulled from a challenge directly seen in his life.
Yes, I love myself right now.
Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I look forward to hearing your feedback during our next class following one of the prompts listed below.